The desert air in Arizona was thick with heat and the constant thudding rhythm of helicopter blades. Captain Maya Thorne stood at the edge of the tarmac, her flight suit sticking to her back, as she watched the H-64 Apache helicopter tear across the sky. It was a beast of a machine, a symphony of raw power and lethal precision. To her, it wasn't just an aircraft. It was a throne in the kingdom of aviation, and she had been told, in ways both direct and subtle, that it was a throne she would never occupy. Her file, stamped with a seemingly permanent non-rated status, sat in some personnel office, a flat declaration that she was not qualified to be a pilot. She was an aeronautical engineer, a technical expert brought in to troubleshoot the Apache's new fire control system. She could speak its digital language, diagnose its electronic ailments, but the brass believed she had no place in its cockpit. Her gender, in the eyes of the old guard, was an unsolvable flaw in the system. The other engineers, all men, would clap her on the shoulder and say she had the best seat in the house, right there on the ground. The compliment felt like a cage. Each day, she would listen to the young pilots, boys fresh out of flight school, stumble through their post-flight debriefs, misinterpreting the data her instruments spat out. She'd bite her tongue, her corrections dying behind her teeth, knowing that unsolicited advice from someone like her would be seen as arrogance, not insight. Her commanding officer, a gruff lieutenant colonel with a mustache that seemed to frown for him, had made it clear. Your genius is in the numbers, Thorne. Let the pilots handle the flying. Everyone has their lane. Stay in yours. The injustice was a cold, hard stone in her gut. She had aced every simulation, devoured every technical manual, until she knew the Apache schematics better than the lines of her own palms. Yet, her hands had never touched the controls. That was about to change, though not in the way she dreamed. A critical flaw had emerged in the targeting software, a ghost in the machine that caused the crosshairs to drift under specific thermal conditions. The field tests were failing, and a high-profile demonstration for a visiting Army general was fast approaching. The lieutenant colonel, desperate, had thrown the problem at her. Fix it, Thorne, or find a good reason why you can't. For 72 hours, she lived in the hangar, surrounded by circuit boards and lines of code. The pilots would see her, a shadow under the aircraft's hellish grin, and joke about her being married to the wiring harness. She ignored them. On the third night, bleary-eyed and fueled by bad coffee, she found it, a single line of errant code in the terrain recognition subsystem, a leftover from an older update that conflicted with the new thermal imagers. It wasn't just a fix, it was an elegant rewrite that improved processing speed by 18%. She submitted her report, expecting at best a nod of acknowledgement. What she got was a summons to the lieutenant colonel's office. He sat behind his desk, her report in front of him. The fix works, Captain. Good job. He paused, drumming his fingers. General John Harrier McKenna is arriving tomorrow for the final demo. He's a legend, flew Apaches in the Gulf War. He's also a skeptic about this new software. You will be present during the pre-flight to explain your adjustments. You will speak only when spoken to. You will be technical, concise, and invisible. Understood. Maya felt a flash of defiance. Sir, if I could perhaps brief the pilots on the operational nuances. The pilots, he interrupted, his voice final, have been briefed. Your role is to support, not to instruct. Dismissed. The next morning, the air was tense with the importance of the visit. The Apache sat gleaming on the flight line, a predator poised to strike. The pilots, Captain Riggs and Lieutenant Choi, were doing their walk-around, looking crisp and confident. Maya stood off to the side with the other technical staff, a clipboard clutched to her chest. Then, a black SUV arrived. Out stepped General McKenna. He was in his late 50s, with a frame that still looked like it could fit into a cockpit and a gaze that missed nothing. He moved with the pilots, listening to their brief, his questions sharp and direct. The demo flight began. From the ground, Maya watched the Apache perform its deadly ballet. Sharp dives, sudden climbs, simulated gun runs. Her eyes were glued to the data feed on her monitor. For 20 minutes, everything was perfect. Then, As the aircraft banked into a high-G turn over the hottest part of the desert, she saw it. A flicker on the telemetry. The crosshairs on the pilot's display were drifting again, just a fraction, but in a real engagement, a fraction meant a miss. It meant death. On the radio, she could hear Captain Riggs' voice, tense. "Sir, we're seeing some instability in the targeting pod. Request to abort the gun demo." General McKenna's voice crackled over the comms, calm, but edged with steel. "Describe the instability, Captain." Riggs fumbled, describing the symptom, but not the cause. "It's jittery, sir. The reticle won't stay locked." The lieutenant colonel shot Maya a look of pure panic. This was the disaster he feared. The general's next words were for everyone on the frequency. "Is the engineer who wrote the patch on this comm?" A silence. Then, "Yes, sir. Captain Thorne is here. Put her on." All eyes turned to Maya. Her mouth went dry. She keyed the mic, her voice surprisingly steady. "Captain Thorne here, sir." "Thorne, your report cited a fix for thermal drift. Is this what we're seeing?" Maya looked at her scrolling data. "Negative, sir. This is a different manifestation. The original bug was in the terrain system. This is in the tracking algorithm's response to rapid atmospheric density change during high-G maneuvers. The software is overcorrecting." Another pause. The Apache continued its orbit in the distance. "Can it be compensated for manually from the cockpit?" "Yes, sir," Maya said, her mind racing through the systems. "If the pilot overrides the auto-stabilization for the targeting pod, switches to manual azimuth control, and uses the secondary crosshair calibrated for the DVO, he can hold the lock. It'll be raw, but it'll work." She heard the general process this. "You're telling my pilot to fly the gun manually while also flying the aircraft through a combat profile?" "The Apache's dual controls allow for it, sir. It requires partitioning the focus. Left hand for aircraft cyclic, right for the gun controls. It's demanding." On the radio, Captain Riggs spluttered. "Sir, that's a simulator exercise. Not in a live demo. With do it," General McKenna ordered, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Captain Thorne, you will talk him through it. Every step." Maya's world narrowed to the voice in her headset and the data on her screen. For the next 5 minutes, she guided Riggs, her instructions clear, calm, and immediate. "Ease off the G just a hair. Now, toggle switch 3 to manual. Feel the resistance in the stick? That's normal. Bring the secondary crosshair up. Don't chase the primary. Let the target drift into it." She was no longer just an engineer on the ground. In her mind, she was in that cockpit, her hands moving in sync with her words. She could feel the vibrations, the sun through the canopy, the pressure of the turn. And then Riggs' voice, tight with surprise. "Lock held, sir. I have a solid track." "Fire simulated," General McKenna ordered. The data stream showed a perfect hit. As the Apache flared for landing, a profound quiet fell over the ground crew. The general walked away from the officers, straight toward Maya. He stopped in front of her, his eyes appraising. He didn't see a woman or an engineer out of place. He saw the person who had just saved his demonstration. "Where did you learn to fly the gun like that, Captain?" he asked, his voice low. Maya stood straight. "I haven't, sir. Not in a real aircraft." "Don't lie to me. That was cockpit intuition. You didn't just recite a manual. You felt the correction." She met his gaze. 10,000 hours in commercial flight simulators, sir. And every training module for the Apache the Army has ever published. I've flown every mission in my head 100 times over." General McKenna studied her for a long moment, then glanced at her name tape and the non-rated badge on her chest. He nodded slowly, a decision hardening behind his eyes. He turned to the pale-faced lieutenant colonel. "Get her flight status paperwork. Every waiver she needs. She's starting Apache flight school next month." The words hung in the air. The lieutenant colonel began to protest. "General, with all due respect, the protocols, the physical demands were just met," McKenna interrupted, his voice silencing the tarmac. "I saw a pilot on that radio today. You saw a problem with the file. Get her papers." He looked back at Maya, whose heart was hammering against her ribs. "You have a gift, Captain. It's a crime to leave it buried in a circuit board." Be ready to work harder than you ever have in your life. The real fight, he said, gesturing to the now silent Apache, starts now. The news that Captain Maya Thorne had been greenlit for Apache flight school by a general's direct order spread through the base like a shockwave. The reaction was a toxic mix of disbelief, resentment, and, from a rare few, quiet encouragement. The lieutenant colonel who had been her CO signed her transfer orders with a face like stone, his earlier panic replaced by a cold formality. You've bypassed every established channel, Captain. I hope you understand the weight of the expectation now on you. You will not just be representing yourself. You will be representing every unconventional candidate. The implication was clear. If she failed, she would be used as proof that the shortcuts were a mistake. The flight school at Fort Novicel was a different world. It was a fortress of tradition, sweat, and noise. From the moment she arrived, Maya was an outlier. Her call sign, given on the first day, was Sprocket. It was not a term of endearment. It underlined her past, marking her as a mechanic, not a warrior. Her class was composed of 24 aviators, all male, most of them younger than her, with years of experience flying Kiowas or Blackhawks. They were pilots transitioning to the Apache. She was an engineer attempting to become one. The initial physical and academic tests were a brutal equalizer. While she could dismantle a helicopter's avionics in her mind, the sheer physical endurance required was staggering. The crash and dash drills, egressing from a simulated crashed aircraft, dragging a weighted dummy, then sprinting to a firing position, left her gasping in the Alabama humidity while others finished strong. In the classroom, the dynamics were reversed. When an instructor, Chief Warrant Officer Miller, a grizzled veteran with a permanent squint, diagrammed a hydraulic failure, he called on her. Sprocket, since you like the guts of this bird so much, what happens when the primary servo fails here? She answered not just with the failure, but with 3 likely cascading faults and the optimal emergency procedure. The room went quiet. Miller just grunted, correct. But knowing it in a book is different from feeling it at 2,000 feet when your controls are turning to soup. The real battle was in the simulators and, eventually, in the air. Her first simulator session was a disaster. The theoretical knowledge was there, but the feel was alien. Flying an Apache was not like flying anything else. It was an act of brutal force married to exquisite sensitivity. Her movements were jerky, overcorrected. The simulated aircraft shuddered and protested. Her instructor, an intense young CW3 named Rossi, sighed heavily in her ear. You're fighting it, Sprocket. You're trying to compute the flight. You need to be the flight. It's a dance, not a math problem. The other students progressed to their first actual flights in the TH-67 trainer helicopters. Maya was held back, relegated to extra simulator hours. The whispers followed her. General's pet. Paper pilot. She ate meals alone, studying flight manuals until her eyes burned. The one person who offered a semblance of solidarity was a fellow student, Captain Dave Hondo Rivera, a broad-shouldered Black Hawk pilot with a calm demeanor. He found her one evening in the simulator bay, running the same emergency auto-rotation sequence for the 10th time. He watched her crash again. You're pulling collective too early, he said, not unkindly. You're scared of the ground. You have to wait for it. Let the rotor energy build. It's counterintuitive. He wasn't patronizing. He was stating a fact. For the next hour, he coached her from the observer's seat. It was the first genuine help she'd received. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source, her engineering mind. Frustrated after another poor sim evaluation, she stayed late and hooked her personal laptop into the simulator's data port. She wrote a simple program that translated the aircraft's feedback, pressure on the controls, vibration, torque, into a unique audio tone. She created a soundscape for flight. A smooth, steady hum for stable hover. A rising, urgent whine for an approaching vortex ring state. She began to fly by ear, her body learning the correct movements through a new sensory language. The next time she flew with Rossi, he was stunned at her transformation. What the hell did you do, Thorne? She just smiled. I found a rhythm, sir. Finally, She was cleared for her first flight in a real T-67. Sitting in the pilot's seat, the rotor blades spinning above her, the living machine trembling around her, was a revelation. The simulator hadn't captured the smell of fuel and hot oil, the sheer visceral noise, the way the landscape dropped away. It was terrifying and exhilarating. She flew the basic maneuvers cleanly. Back on the ground, Rossi gave her a curt nod. Adequate. You're not a hazard to aviation anymore. It was the highest praise she'd gotten. But the Apache itself, the formidable H-64, was the final mountain. The first time she approached it on the flight line, its sleek, aggressive profile was more intimidating than any general. Climbing into the front seat, the gunner's seat, as a new pilot in command, she would start there, was like entering the cockpit of a fighter jet. The array of screens, switches, and the iconic EHAD's helmet that projected targeting data directly onto her, I felt both familiar and utterly foreign. Her first Apache flight was with a senior instructor, a quiet, meticulous man named Chief Parker. The aircraft lifted off, a powerful predatory surge. The sensitivity was magnified tenfold from the trainer. A gentle nudge on the cyclic sent them sliding sideways. The Apache demanded respect and absolute confidence. They practiced hover, translation, basic maneuvers. Maya's hands were steady, her voice calm on the intercom. Then Parker introduced her to the systems, the TADS, Target Acquisition and Designation System, the PNVS, Pilot Night Vision System. This was her world. As he fumbled through a target acquisition sequence, she instinctively reached for the hand controllers. Sir, if you use the bore sight function first to calibrate, you can slave the TADS to the helmet sight in half the time. There was a pause. Show me, Parker said. Her fingers danced over the controls. The targeting pod slewed smoothly, locked onto a distant water tower with terrifying speed. Parker was silent for a long moment. Okay, he said finally, a note of new respect in his voice. I see what the general was talking about. Word of her preternatural skill with the Apache's weapon systems began to spread, changing the dynamic. The disdain from her classmates shifted to a wary, competitive curiosity. They started asking her for help with systems malfunctions in the sim. She became the go-to for understanding the why behind the aircraft's behavior. During a demanding nighttime navigation exercise, it was Maya who calmly talked Hondo through a complete instrument failure, guiding him to a safe landing using only terrain features and the targeting pod's thermal imaging, a trick she'd theorized from the manuals. She was no longer just Sprocket. She was becoming Thorn, an aviator. But the ultimate test awaited, the final check ride, a grueling 2-hour flight that tested every skill under simulated combat conditions. Her evaluator would be none other than Chief Warrant Officer Miller, the classroom skeptic. The night before, General McKenna called her. His voice was a gravelly comfort over the phone. They tell me you're holding your own, Captain. Trying to, sir. Remember, they test you because the aircraft will test you harder. The enemy will test you hardest of all. Fly the machine, you know. Not the one they think you should be. The check ride was a gauntlet. Emergency procedures, nap of the earth flying to avoid radar, simulated enemy engagements. Miller threw everything at her, his voice a steady, unreadable monotone in her helmet. Then, in the final phase, he simulated a catastrophic hydraulic failure and an engine fire warning simultaneously. You're hit. You're losing pressure. What do? Maya's mind didn't panic. It compartmentalized. Declare emergency. Initiate single-engine procedures. Execute emergency landing checklist for open field. Her hands moved with a speed that surprised even her, isolating systems, managing the remaining power. She brought the shuddering, simulated Apache into a tight auto-rotation, flaring at the last second for a hard but survivable landing in a virtual field. For a full minute after the simulation ended, Miller said nothing. He just reviewed the flight data. Then, he turned in his seat. The permanent squint seemed to have softened a fraction. You fly it like you built it, he said. And you saved the damn data recorder. Engineer to the last. He unbuckled and climbed out. At the debrief, He handed her the completed evaluation form. At the bottom, in bold letters, it said, "Recommended for Apache assignment." "Congratulations, Pilot Thorne," Miller said, and for the first time he offered a faint, hard-earned smile. She had crossed the threshold. The cockpit was now hers. But, as she looked out at the line of waiting Apaches, she knew the general was right. The real fight was only just beginning. The silver Apache wings pinned to Maya Thorne's uniform felt less like a decoration and more like a promise, one that demanded fulfillment. Her assignment to the 1st Attack Reconnaissance Battalion at Fort Hood placed her in the heart of an operational unit, a world away from the controlled environment of flight school. Here, the stakes were not grades, but lives and missions. Her new company commander, Major Briggs, was a career soldier who viewed McKenna's experiment with open skepticism. He assigned her to a senior pilot, Chief Warrant Officer 5, Vince Grimm Reichert, a legend in the battalion with a face like weathered leather and over 4,000 flight hours in the Apache. Grimm was a man of few words, most of them grunts or curses. His reputation was built on a cold, flawless professionalism and a deep, unspoken love for his crew. As her aircraft commander, he would be the one flying from the front seat, with Maya in the back as the co-pilot gunner, CPG. Their first flight together was a study in tense silence. Grimm ran through the pre-flight with a silent efficiency that was more intimidating than any shout. In the air, his control of the aircraft was absolute, a seamless extension of his will. When he spoke, it was only to issue terse commands. "Gun, check Sector 3. Systems, full diagnostic." She realized he was testing her, not just on procedures, but on her temperament. Could she handle the pressure of his cockpit? She matched his silence with her own focused efficiency. When he called for a system check, her response was instantaneous and precise. When he designated a target during a simulated gun run, she locked it with a speed that made the targeting pod whir in protest. After landing, as they filled out the post-flight forms, Grimm finally looked at her directly. "You're fast with the systems, but speed is useless if you don't understand the fight." He pointed to a map. "Tomorrow, we're running a joint exercise with the infantry. Your job isn't just to shoot what I tell you. Your job is to see the battle, to think like the ground commander. Read the brief tonight, not just the aviation part, all of it." The exercise was a complex, company-level air assault. The Apaches were providing escort and close air support for a battalion of soldiers being inserted by Black Hawks into a mock urban combat zone. In the air, the radio traffic was chaotic. The infantry commander on the ground, a captain with a stressed voice, was reporting heavy resistance from a fortified position in a cluster of buildings, stalling the advance. Grimm's voice was calm. "Thorne, find us a solution." Maya scanned through her suite of sensors, the thermal imaging, the daylight camera, the radar. She saw the reported enemy position, but her eye was caught by a heat signature pattern 2 blocks to the east, a rhythmic pulse suggesting reinforcements moving through an alley, unseen by the ground troops. "Sir, the main position is a distraction. Look at Sector Echo 7. There's a feeder route. If we suppress that, the main position loses its resupply. The infantry can flank." Grimm studied the feed she slaved to his display. A long silence followed, filled only with the thrum of the rotors. "Good eye," he said, the words sounding almost foreign coming from him. "Battle Captain, this is Apache 1-1. Recommend you shift Bravo team to Grid GL 8812. We're engaging a feeder route to your east. Stand by for effects." He then gave Maya the command. "You have the gun. Make it count." It was the first time he'd given her tactical control. She took a breath, her hand settling on the control stick. She guided the crosshairs, not onto the obvious building, but onto the mouth of the alley. "Engaging with simulated," she said, and pressed the trigger. On the ground, the infantry captain later reported the simulated enemy resistance melted away after that run. In the debrief, Major Briggs acknowledged the successful outcome, but his praise for the aviation support was generic, aimed at the team. Grimm, however, stopped her on the way to the lockers. He handed her a cup of the thick, tar-like coffee he drank. "You saw the weave. not just a thread, he said. That's what makes a CPEG. Don't lose that. It was the beginning of a hard-won mutual respect. Grimm became her most demanding and most valuable teacher. He taught her the Apache's dark arts, flying so low that the rotor wash kicked up dust devils in empty fields, using terrain masks to hide from simulated air defenses, managing fuel and weapons with the frugality of a survivalist. He also taught her the weight of the cockpit. One afternoon, after a long training flight, they sat in a hangar. He spoke quietly, his eyes distant. We lost a bird in Afghanistan. Good crew. They saw the threat to the boys on the ground. They pressed the attack. Took an RPG. There was nothing left to bring home. He looked at her. The machine is a weapon, but the decision to use it is human. That weight is yours now too. Never forget it. Maya absorbed it all. Her technical mastery merged with Grimm's warrior wisdom. She began to develop her own style, a blend of surgical precision and aggressive tactical foresight. During a large-scale force-on-force exercise, her aircraft was tasked with being the high bird, providing overwatch. While other Apaches dove into the fray, she hovered at altitude, her sensors painting the entire battlefield. She noticed a pattern in the opposing forces' movements, a systematic probing of their unit's left flank. She called it out, predicting a major push there in minutes. The intelligence officer initially dismissed it, but Grimm backed her. The push came exactly as she predicted, and, because of her warning, it was met with a prepared defense. After that, call sign Sprocket was rarely used. She was now Oracle. Her reputation began to precede her. She was requested by name for complex missions. Major Briggs' skepticism turned into a guarded reliance. Though he still occasionally questioned her aggressive suggestions in planning sessions, a hesitation he never showed with male pilots of similar rank. The ultimate validation came 8 months into her tour. A real-world search and rescue mission was launched for a downed civilian medevac helicopter that had crashed in a remote, mountainous region during a storm. The weather was marginal, the terrain treacherous. 2 other Apache crews had attempted to locate the crash site, but were forced back by zero visibility in the valleys. Grimm and Thorn were scrambled. The flight was a nightmare of swirling cloud and sudden rock faces glimpsed through breaks in the fog. Maya used the Apache's radar in a way the manuals never advised, bouncing signals off canyon walls to build a crude 3D map of their blind surroundings. Grimm flew with an almost supernatural instinct, trusting her whispered warnings. Cliff face, 200 meters, 11 o'clock. Rising terrain, right? Now, for 2 hours, they crept through the murk. Then, on thermal, Maya spotted a faint, fading bloom of heat against the cold rock. There, at 2 o'clock. It's the engine. They hovered, a stable platform in the maelstrom. She guided in a Pave Hawk rescue helicopter with precise grid coordinates and talked them down through the cloud layer using her sensors as their eyes. The medevac crew was recovered alive. A week later, a commendation letter from the rescue wing arrived on Major Briggs' desk. That same afternoon, Grimm found her performing maintenance on their aircraft's targeting pod. He leaned against the fuselage. Major's putting you in for aircraft commander qualification. Front seat. You'll have your own bird, your own CPEG. Maya stopped, a circuit card in her hand. It was the final barrier, the transition from being a crew member to being the ultimate authority in the aircraft. You ready for the front seat, Oracle? Grimm asked, his usual gruffness absent. She looked from the circuit card in her hand to the vast, powerful machine around her. The journey from the tarmac in Arizona, barred from even touching it, to being entrusted with its command, felt immense. The machine is the same, she said finally, meeting his gaze. But I'm not. He nodded, a gesture of profound transfer. No, he agreed. You're not. Now, go pack. Your new fight is waiting. The transition to the front seat of the Apache was a psychological leap as much as a technical one. In the back, as the co-pilot gunner, Maya's world had been defined by a single, lethal purpose: find, lock, and engage. The front seat was a symphony of simultaneous demands. Here, She was no longer just the weapon's brain. She was the aircraft's soul, the battle manager, the final decision-maker responsible for the $50 million machine, her crew in the back, and the success of the mission. Her new CPEG was a young, eager warrant officer named Jamie Carter, callsign Rook, who looked at her with a mix of awe and nervousness. Their first flight together was a simple orientation. Maya felt the difference immediately. The controls were the same, but the perspective was vast. She was responsible for navigation, communication with command, threat avoidance, and overall tactical employment. She found herself talking constantly, a running dialogue meant to keep Rook in the loop and build their crew coordination. Rook, I'm turning us into the wind for the run. Scanning for threats left. You have the valley to the right. Talk to me about targets of opportunity. Her voice was calm, a mirror of Grimm's steady tone, but infused with her own methodical precision. She was building a cockpit culture from scratch, one based on mutual awareness and relentless observation. The unit was deploying for a 6-month rotation to a forward operating base in Eastern Europe, part of a NATO reassurance mission. The environment was one of constant, simmering tension. Their mission was to deter aggression through a visible, ready presence. It was a game of cat and mouse along contested borders, a far cry from the desert training grounds. Their Apache, tail number 234, became a familiar sight in the skies, a silent sentinel. The missions were long, tedious hours of patrol, interspersed with sudden, high-stakes provocations. They would track unidentified aircraft skirting Allied airspace, observe military movements from a discreet distance, and provide a show of force during joint exercises. The pressure was unrelenting and invisible, a constant thrum in the background. It was during one of these tense patrols that the theoretical became terrifyingly real. They were monitoring a large-scale, unscheduled military exercise by a rival power near a sensitive border region. The airspace was crowded with enemy fighter jets performing aggressive mock intercepts on Allied reconnaissance planes. The radio was a cacophony of warnings and clipped transmissions. Maya's aircraft was on station, providing overwatch for a small team of Allied special forces conducting surveillance on ground. Oracle, this is Groundhog. We have visual on a possible mobile missile battery moving into a concealed position. Grid is Charlie Lima 9 or 4. Rook located the vehicle convoy on her targeting pod. Confirmed, Oracle. I have 6 vehicles. Signature match est à 17 système. This was a significant escalation, a sophisticated surface-to-air missile system being moved into range of Allied flight paths. As they tracked the convoy, Maya's threat warning system suddenly blared. A painting radar from one of the enemy fighters had locked onto them. We're being illuminated, she said, her voice flat. Groundhog, we have a lock. We may need to break station. Negative, Oracle. If they get those missiles set up, this whole valley is denied. We need a positive ID for command. Can you hold? Maya assessed the situation in seconds. The fighter was posturing, but hadn't fired. The missile battery was minutes from being operational. The Special Forces team was vulnerable. Rook, keep the pod on that lead vehicle. I'm going to give them something else to think about. She pushed the Apache into a sudden, diving turn, not away from the fighter, but towards a narrow canyon system, flying nap of the earth. The locking radar stuttered and lost them as they fell below its line of sight. She flew through the canyon with aggressive grace, using the terrain as a shield. Groundhog, we're still on target. Feeding you video now. 4 or 5 heart-pounding minutes, she danced with the terrain, popping up just long enough for Rook to get clearer footage before descending again, always keeping the missile convoy in sensor range. The fighter, unable to follow into the jagged terrain, broke off. They successfully documented the deployment, providing NATO command with irrefutable evidence of the threat. The video and data were immediately classified and shot up the chain. Back at the FOB, the debrief was intense. A colonel from intelligence was present. Your actions provided us with a critical strategic picture, Captain Thorne. You also took a significant risk. The risk of inaction was greater, sir, Maya replied. The SA-17 would have closed the airspace. Groundhog would have been blind. The colonel nodded. General McKenna has been briefed. He sends his regards. The incident cemented her crew's confidence and solidified her status within the squadron. Rook looked at her with undisguised admiration. You never even flinched, ma'am. The aircraft did what it was built to do, Maya said, but inside, she felt the echo of Grimm's words about the weight of human decision. She had chosen to press the mission. The consequences, good or catastrophic, would have been hers. The deployment ground on, a parade of gray days and alert nights. The strain began to show on everyone. Then, in the final month, the call came. A severe storm had caused catastrophic flooding in a neighboring Allied nation. A remote village was cut off, with reports of casualties. The host nation's rescue helicopters were overwhelmed or unable to reach the area due to the mountainous terrain and continuing severe weather. NATO was asked to assist. The mission was a humanitarian one, but the conditions were worse than combat. They were to locate survivors and guide in heavy-lift helicopters. Maya's flight was one of 2 Apaches tasked. The weather was at minimums, the wind shearing violently. Rain and cloud reduced visibility to near zero. Using radar and thermal, they picked their way through the valleys. The devastation below was apocalyptic. Raging brown rivers where roads had been, houses smashed to timber. They located a group of survivors, maybe 24 people, stranded on a shrinking island of high ground, the waters rising around them. The rescue helicopters couldn't get close without precise guidance. Maya made a decision. Rook, I'm putting us into a hover. I need you to use the laser rangefinder and the pod to map a safe approach lane for the Chinook. I'm going to talk them down. It was a precarious maneuver, holding a stable hover in gusting winds, with minimal visual references over a disaster zone. But the Apache was rock-steady in her hands. For 20 minutes, she held position, a fixed point in the chaos, while Rook, her voice tight with focus, painted a digital path through the storm. Maya's voice was a metronome on the radio to the struggling Chinook pilot. Come left 3 degrees. Hold your descent. You have a clear lane now. 200 meters to the survivors. One by one, the survivors were winched to safety. As the Chinook pulled away, laden with people, the ground team commander's voice cracked over the radio. God bless you, Apache. You saved them all. The flight back was silent, the adrenaline replaced by a profound, weary gratitude. They had trained for war, but had found a deeper purpose in mercy. The deployment ended. As her transport plane lifted off from the FOB, Maya looked out the window at the shrinking landscape below. She had flown in anger, in deterrence, and in compassion. The Apache was no longer just a machine she had fought to fly. It had become an instrument of her will, for good or for ill. She had proven, to everyone who had ever doubted, that her skill was not an anomaly, but a talent honed in the fires of necessity. She had earned her place. But as she closed her eyes, she knew the story wasn't about earning a place. It was about defining it. And she was just getting started. The return to Fort Hood was a return to a different reality. Captain Maya Thorne was no longer a curiosity or an experiment. The whispered stories from Europe of the border standoff, the storm rescue, had filtered back, polished by time, and retelling into something approaching legend. The silver Apache wings on her chest now carried the unspoken weight of proven combat readiness. She was given command of a platoon, responsible for 3 Apache crews and their multi-million-dollar aircraft. Her desk was suddenly covered with paperwork, personnel evaluations, and training schedules. The bureaucratic side of leadership felt, at times, like a heavier lift than the aircraft itself. She found herself in meetings, arguing for better simulator time for her crews, advocating for maintenance priorities, and mentoring young aviators, both male and female, who now looked at her as a pathfinder. One of them was a newly assigned female warrant officer, Sarah Flynn, who was struggling with the same subtle biases Maya had once faced. Finding Flynn alone after a tough simulator session, Maya didn't offer empty encouragement. She sat down with the raw data. Your hover work is fine. It's your threat reaction that's slow. You're spending too much time verifying what you already know. In the cockpit, your first glance has to be your best guess. Trust your training. She saw herself in Flynn's determined, frustrated eyes. General McKenna, now a 3-star, visited the base for a readiness inspection. He requested a brief from Captain Thorne on the tactical lessons from a European deployment. In a room full of senior officers, she presented with a cool authority, using mission footage to illustrate points about terrain masking in modern threat environments and the evolving use of the Apache sensors for non-traditional roles. Afterward, McKenna took her aside. You've built a reputation on competence, Thorne. That's the only kind that lasts. What's next? She didn't hesitate. The mission commander's course, sir. I want to lead the entire fight, not just my bird. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. I'll expect your application. The course was the final academic fortress, teaching how to coordinate multiple aircraft, artillery, and ground forces in a complex battle. It was here, in the wargaming scenarios, that Maya's unique blend of deep technical knowledge and hard-won tactical intuition found its ultimate expression. During a culminating exercise, her team was tasked with a deep strike attack against a simulated enemy command center. The defenses were layered and sophisticated. Other student planners advocated for a high-altitude, standoff missile approach. Maya proposed,